stop everything. A single, unexplained phone call has torn a new hole through a case that many thought was nearly closed, and the questions it raises cut straight into the heart of motive, opportunity, and whether anyone else knew what was about to happen. If you want first-hand updates on this developing story and others, hit subscribe and turn on the bell now. Investigators initially believed they had nearly solved Charlie Kirk's murder, a motive mapped, a weapon identified, and a suspect named. That early confidence shaped headlines, reassured a shaken public, and set the criminal justice machinery into motion. But a criminal case is not only a chain of evidence. It is a sequence of choices about which leads to follow first and which questions to bracket for later. In the earliest hours and days, detectives leaned on what they could most quickly and clearly document: physical evidence linking a person to a weapon, corroborating accounts that fit a plausible motive, and a timeline that, on its face, pointed cleanly to a single actor. Those elements are the backbone of prosecutorial strategy. They allow authorities to obtain warrants, secure suspects, and present a coherent theory to a court and to the public. That coherence matters because it transforms chaos into something a jury and a community can hold in its hands. But the very act of creating a coherent narrative has costs when the evidence left out of the frame later reappears with force. Investigators working the case relied on fingerprinting, DNA swabs, ballistic matching, and digital traces that pointed to Tyler Robinson. The forensic picture that formed around him suggested physical interaction with the rifle and behavioral markers in the hours leading up to the event. Prosecutors, looking to build a charge that could meet the high standard of criminal law, found in that forensic package a plausible path to arrest and indictment. Yet the arc from probable cause to conviction is a long one, and the early framing, necessary as it often is to keep an investigation from sprawling, can unintentionally narrow inquiry. Once a suspect is in custody and the public conversation has coalesced around a single actor, alternative leads can be viewed with skepticism or even ignored as distracting. That's why the newly revealed phone call detail, coming from the suspect's own phone records, matters so profoundly. It pierces the tidy narrative by introducing an unaccounted-for variable in the moments before the killing. The discovery of a call that had not been previously disclosed forces a re-evaluation of what investigators thought they knew and, perhaps more painfully, how confidently they declared the case solved. For law enforcement, there is an institutional logic to acting quickly on strong forensic evidence. It prevents flight, preserves evidence integrity, and can protect the public. But there is also a moral and procedural responsibility to follow every reasonable lead, even if that means changing the story you first told the public. That tension between closure and completeness is playing out now in real time. What the phone call reveals, whether it indicates another person's involvement, and how authorities reconcile it with the rest of the evidence will shape both the prosecution's case and public judgment about whether justice was thorough or rushed. When Tyler Robinson's phone records were examined, investigators found an outgoing call in the hours before the shooting that had previously gone unnoticed in public reporting. Phone metadata is a forensic goldmine. It establishes location at a given time, reveals patterns of contact leading up to an event, and can help map social networks that are otherwise invisible. The unexplained outgoing call stood out because of its timing and because it didn't fit the interpersonal pattern investigators had cataloged in the suspect's recent communications. Typically, analysts will look at the last several days and weeks of activity, flagging contacts that spike in frequency, sudden calls to unfamiliar numbers, or communications that occur in the immediate lead-up to a crime. In this instance, the call was not a brief misdial or an anomaly buried among dozens of routine exchanges. It occurred during a narrow window when digital evidence suggested the suspect was preparing, moving, or otherwise acting in a way that culminated in the fatal shooting. For investigators, that makes the call particularly significant. Timing in criminal investigations often colors the meaning of otherwise neutral acts. Tracing the call became a priority. Investigators subpoenaed carrier records, used legal tools to map the number's routing, and applied standard telecom forensics to determine whether the call was completed, whether it connected to a human on the other end or to a voicemail or forwarding service, and what cell towers or location data could be associated with it. Those technical steps are painstaking and time-consuming, but they are essential for converting an anonymous entry in a phone log into a lead with direction. In many criminal cases, a single call, who it was to, what was said, and whether it was a test, signal, or communication of final intent, can shift a prosecution from being solely about one actor to being about coordination among several. The presence of that outbound call opened the possibility that Robinson had at least one other active point of contact in the hours before the killing, which raises questions about planning, assistance, and motive formation beyond what the initial case file suggested. When investigators dug into the number, they discovered it was not saved in Robinson's contacts and, crucially, it had never appeared in his prior records. That absence is a small detail with oversized implications. Most people rely on stored contacts for frequent correspondence and for those they plan with or coordinate in regular ways. An unsaved number suggests either a transient, deliberately unrecorded contact or an encounter unique to that day, perhaps a burner line, an unfamiliar accomplice, or an intermediary. From a behavioral standpoint, the use of unsaved numbers is a technique often associated with attempts to avoid leaving clear trails in digital logs, though it can also reflect ordinary, one-off interactions. The fact that the number did not show up in prior records increases its evidentiary significance. It is not the artifact of long-standing relationships. Instead, it appears as something that entered the suspect's life at a crucial moment, raising questions about who initiated the contact and why. Timing is everything in criminal investigations, and the closeness of the call to the crime scene amplified its importance. If the call occurred mere hours before the shooting, or, as contemporaneous analysis suggested, within a narrow band of time that put it in direct temporal relation to the suspect's final movements, investigators must consider several possibilities. The call could be an operational check-in with an accomplice. It could be a farewell or signal from someone advising or directing the suspect. It could have been an emotional or impulsive exchange that spoke to the suspect's state of mind. Or it might be entirely unrelated, a coincidence that becomes haunting precisely because of its timing. The law does not treat timing lightly. Prosecutors and defense alike will use temporal proximity to argue about motive, planning, and conscience. Forensic timelines often form the spine of legal narratives. A call at 5:42 p.m. becomes more than a data point when the shooting occurs at 6:15 p.m. It becomes a meaningful bookend that potentially connects people and actions. For investigators, this is why telecom forensics are paired with geolocation data, surveillance footage, and witness statements, to locate the suspect within a behavioral lattice that either corroborates a lone actor hypothesis or indicates broader coordination. Authorities traced the number through subpoenas and carrier records but, in public statements, withheld its identity. There are multiple reasons law enforcement may decide not to disclose certain pieces of evidence: protecting an ongoing investigation, avoiding compromising immunity or cooperation agreements, or shielding the privacy of uninvolved parties who used the same number. Still, non-disclosure breeds speculation. Protecting the identity might be legally necessary if the number connects to a cooperating witness, a confidential informant, or an unrelated third party with no involvement. It might also be tactical. Investigators could be building additional charges tied to others and do not want to reveal their hand. Conversely, the decision to withhold can be perceived by families and the public as opacity or, worse, obfuscation. In high-profile cases, transparency can be a difficult balance to strike. Revealing too much can ruin investigative leverage, while revealing too little can erode trust. That withheld identity transformed the phone call into the seed of rumor and conjecture. Public debate quickly intensified across traditional and social media platforms. Where official channels went quiet, alternative narratives flourished. Was there an accomplice who fled? Did a political adversary direct the act? Was the call a final goodbye or a signal to act? Speculation fills the vacuum left by silence, and in today's information ecosystem, those speculations often circulate faster and louder than carefully constructed official statements. For families trying to grieve and for a community craving clarity, that cacophony is corrosive. It amplifies grief into suspicion and erodes faith in institutions charged with establishing facts. The very existence of a single unexplained call can become the hinge on which multiple, contradictory stories swing. Prosecutors, for their part, came to view the call as a key piece of evidence about Robinson's state of mind in the hours leading up to the attack. In legal framing, what a defendant did, thought, or communicated shortly before an offense can inform inferences about intent, premeditation, and consciousness of guilt. If the call reflected coordination, it could be used to argue that the act was planned rather than impulsive, a crucial distinction in murder prosecutions. If the call contained threats, instructions, or evidence of shared planning, it could broaden the scope of culpability beyond the defendant alone. Even a call that appears mundane on its face can carry meaning when situated amid a wider pattern of behavior, repeated contacts to unknown numbers, last-minute financial transfers, or messages that indicate travel or preparation. Prosecutors will want to make clear to a jury whether the call fits into a sequence of purposeful acts or whether it is an unexplained tangent with no bearing on the culpable choices that followed. For Charlie Kirk's family, the call has become a haunting what-if. Families of victims often live with the painful calculus of prevention. Could someone have done something different? Could a strand of communication have been intercepted, traced, or otherwise acted upon to stop what came next? Those questions are not just hypothetical, they are the raw edges of grief. When authorities reveal that an unexplained call existed, families inevitably wonder whether, had that line been traced faster or its recipient identified sooner, the chain of events might have been interrupted. That line of thinking is emotionally natural and reflects a deep desire for control in a situation that offered none. Investigators, sensitive to that grief, must both explain the limitations of real-time intelligence and demonstrate the steps they took once the call was discovered. Families need answers that feel substantive, not evasive, even when the technical reality is that some data cannot produce the certainty their hearts demand. Investigators acknowledge that the unanswered call may forever remain an unsettling mystery in the case. Despite modern forensic tools, there are hard limits. Numbers that route through multiple carriers, calls placed through encrypted services, or communications that traverse ephemeral platforms can leave traces that are difficult or impossible to recover in a way admissible at trial. Even when a number is identified, the person on the other end may be unreachable, deceased, or uncooperative. Legal constraints, such as privacy protections for uninvolved third parties, can also prevent disclosure of details that would satisfy public curiosity. A judicial subpoena process, the need for probable cause to obtain certain types of data, and international routing of calls complicate timelines. All of this means that, sometimes, the most important fact in an investigation remains the fact of its mystery. The broader lesson here is stark and human. A single phone call can redirect an investigation, alter public narrative, and leave a family with persistent doubt. Even when the rest of the case is strong, that one unexplained connection can open the door to competing theories and unrelenting public scrutiny. As the case moves forward in court and as investigators continue to follow leads, watch for whether the number is ever publicly tied to another person, whether prosecutors use the call to argue premeditation, and whether independent reviews of investigative choices are launched to answer families' questions about timing and disclosure. In the meantime, the unresolved call will remain a haunting footnote, a reminder that small, overlooked details can become central to our pursuit of truth, and that in the wake of violence, certainty is often the hardest thing to achieve. Remember that timing matters as much as content in investigative work, and that procedural choices about disclosure carry moral as well as tactical weight. The unexplained call in Tyler Robinson's records has altered the shape of a case many assumed was straightforward, forcing investigators to revisit timelines, re-interview witnesses, and re-examine what a single piece of metadata can tell us about human action. For the family, for the community, and for a justice system that must balance expedience with completeness, the phone call is now a central, unsettled question. Stay tuned for court filings, prosecutorial statements, and any forensic reports that shed light on whether this call was a last-minute coordination, an irrelevant coincidence, or a trace of people still left unaccounted for.